Welcome, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and I hope you all have a good seminar. I'm coming from Finland, but actually I'm originally from Argentina. I have been living in Finland for 14 years. So for me it could be, I hope this seminar is the beginning of a dialogue and a collaboration with Estonian museums. So I'm going to talk first about what it was my doctoral dissertation, my research in Media Lab, and then what we are doing nowadays also as part of the work in Aalto University. So this is the book that I published when I was doing my research, and it's about designing for an open museum, and you can find the PDF online and free. So it's an exploration of content creation and sharing through interactive pieces. So I have a background in design. I'm an interaction designer, and with a participatory design approach. So that meaning that I do not go to the museum and tell them, okay, we are going to do that, and I want it in this way, but instead what I do is a lot of work together with the museum personnel. And so my dissertation is in the middle of these fields, in new media studies and museology. Oops. So the main question I have as a researcher, I'm not like, I work with a framework which is like very near to action research, named design research. So I do these interactive pieces in the museum, and then I analyze what's going on around them, what happened, and analyze the content and well, the whole ecology and the new situation that these pieces generate. So please, if I talk too fast, do like that, and I will go slower, because I get excited in a moment and then it goes fast. How to create interactive design that encourages people to participate in exhibitions. So for answer these questions, I did 3 pieces in 3 museums. This one is in Atheneum Art Museum. It's part of the Finnish National Gallery, and it's sound trace. So basically, we have a lot of different workshops with visually impaired people in order to design together with them an audio guide. But this time the audio guide was participative. What does it mean? Is that normally when you go to a museum, you put the audio guide and you listen to the guide of the museum speeches, right? In this time, the visually impaired people in the museum, they could put some gloves, the white gloves there, you see, and then they touch certain sculptures, and they could put themselves what they feel and how they perceive the artwork when they were touching these sculptures. So it was very interesting because they touch these sculptures and then they say, well, I imagine this curly brown hair and this olive skin. And then these are the things that we, as sighted people, we don't imagine. So I thought that, hey, they have very interesting comments, and it's about bridging and making a dialogue between visitors that are not in the same time in the museum. So we did actually a prototype. It was 2005 at that time, like this. It was a PDA. I mean, this is old technology because at that time we didn't have all the mobile phones that we have nowadays. And we have been gathering comments from visually impaired people, and we did. So the idea is that you, as a sighted person, you could choose to listen a comment from the guide and from a visually impaired person. So you could have like different voices or a different narrative related to the exhibition. That was the first one. The second trial was conversation map, and it was in Taidehalli. Taidehalli is like a national gallery. So it's a gallery, but it's from the Finnish state. And that was a trial I did. I was working, collaborating with the development of a software for annotating a map. Annotating a map means like putting comments on a map. Nowadays, this is normal. You can do it in Google Map. You can see the map and you can put moment. At that moment, we were working in that software named Imanode, and I approached the museum and I said, hey, I want to do this trial that why if we put this interactive map and people can comment on the different pieces in the exhibition. And then I put this simple thing there in the hall of the museum. It was a young art biennale, and this was the map I did. So it was, each of these were the different rooms in the museum, and people could click on them and then leave a comment. But the interesting feature of this map, it was also that they could leave a comment that would be, this comment could have a link to whatever other comment in to whatever other material in internet. So the piece of comment could be a piece of music, or it could be, for example, I think your artwork is similar to this other artist. So they could connect different artistic or trends. So instead of being all the comments kind of, yeah, good, because in a sense this is like a guest book, right? But what is the real difference? That first it is in the hall of the museum, so everybody can see it. And by being public, what means is that people put a little bit more of effort in what they write there, and some people really wrote long essays. Some people went to their house after a visit to the museum, and they wrote like really like they wanted to give something back to the exhibition, and they remained with some artwork in the mind, and then they wanted to comment. So some of them, they were kind of like, yes, good exhibition, and then we have others that were very, very rich. So that was about floating time. And some of them, they really put poems, and they inspired themselves with pieces like, they were like really practicing creative writing. So after this trial, I thought that I really wanted to do, I think when we are creating participatory pieces, it's very important that we don't just leave it there, but we kind of nurture them, and we kind of garden them. So I did this piece, and it was The Secret Life of Objects in the Science Museum. And again, it was a map, but at the beginning it was a map in the cellar part of the permanent exhibition that was in the cellar of the museum. But then the museum, the education staff in the museum, they decided to do a whole exhibition based on the map. So it was all the activities and all the educative material was around the map, and was about what is the content that we are going to gather to support this participation that we want. So the secret life of objects means the stories behind the objects. Most of the objects you will see, they are like everyday life objects, like the Fiskars scissors. Fiskars scissors are like a classic and emblematic symbol of Finnish design. And then you have a lot of these comments made by foreigners coming to the museum and saying, hey, I've used these scissors to cut the hair of my sister. And then Finnish saying the first thing I asked my mom to bring me when I moved to Australia was the Fiskars scissors. So all these stories that attach people to the scissors. So as you see, like instead of adding these comments in a board with post-it notes, I gave them the category of being as curatorial content, right? Because the comments, they are kind of presented as the same way as it could be presented, the curator narrative. So in that sense, when people approach the map and generate like their own comment, they knew that their comment is going to be displayed there. So I really have very little comments that were not respecting the content or were not. So that was one of the strategies to honor visitors' comments, like displaying them in a way in the exhibition that shows that, hey, we care about what you have to tell us. So we are going to display in these ways.
But the artists, they use, no, they was museum artists, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It's not that like the users came and donated?
No. It was not a participatory way of making the exhibition. It was the normal, this is like the permanent objects of the museum. And then, well, you can see a lot of this dialogue within visitors, foreigners, and Finnish, and also a lot of jokes, humor. I will show you the analysis later. But something else that, well, the idea is to show both, right? Because in the interactive map, you also could see the narrative from the guide. So this is the same as in the first case I showed you with the participatory audio guide. You have the guide discourse, and then you have in parallel the visitor's discourse, and how they play together. Like the visitor's discourse could enrich this dialogue and at the same time show like the diversity of perspective. And basically, like the main point is that even though museums in my country, in Argentina, they are for free, people, they don't go if they don't feel they know about what is there. So when you let people connect in other ways to the content of the museum, so when you let people publish shows or when you let people publish their own stories, makes the whole content of the museum more accessible. Because people, they just don't go because they think they have to know what the curator says there, or they have to at least relate to that. So allowing visitors' participation is a way to make the museum more inclusive. So part of the, you remember in the previous case I told you that people could leave messages that were, like the kind of messages I gathered in the previous case were very creative. So I decided to bring a group of teenagers that they practice creative writing. So it's their hobby, so they write. And I told them, well, we select a group of objects and we told them to write odes, so poems. You know, these odes are these poems that you glorious something. Pablo Neruda has made many of these ones that you have the ode to the potato or you have the ode to the wine. Well, I asked them, together with the teacher, we have a workshop in which they make odes to the different objects of the museum. So besides this is the Eliel Saarinen chair, then you have like teenagers' poems all around. And for the teenagers, they came with the parents, and it was like, hey, this is our museum with the poems there. So for the teenagers, it was a glory to have the possibility to have their own poems displayed in the design museum. And also for people, it's another way to approach the objects, because if you don't have a visual background, I am a designer, so I don't necessarily need the poem, but the poem in dialogue with the chair, I just enjoy it. But for someone that does not have a visual background, the poem can be a way to enter into into the chair to really understand the chair and the value of that chair. So you can see here, for example, like this is how you could see the comment from this done by the museum personnel, and then the comment done by a visitor. So what I was doing is that I do not consider these pieces like done, but I consider them prototypes, because always there was, like, the idea was that you create something to analyze what's going on, and then you create the second piece and the following one. So this is why this is about prototyping interaction design in exhibition. So all the time is like it's a process, and I see like these three pieces as part of the same process. And this is the design research. The action is to put these pieces. So all the work we have done is like, for example, with the map, right? The idea was like not just to leave a map in the museum, but try to enrich what is going on. I was working with the guards in order that they invite people to interact with the map. I was another trial that we did. You can see it here. Well, let's see if yes, here you can see it. Is that I invite kids that were playing the guitar to make songs based on the objects of the museum. So why all these trials? And it's not such a big effort, because at the end it was like one workshop with the teenagers and one workshop with the kids. But, well, they wrote songs based on the same 6 objects that we have picked, and we also designed a program with the kids, with kindergarten kids, to make artwork based on the objects in the exhibition. So again, the idea of this was that if you don't have a visual background, but you are a musician, you might be getting and understanding the piece in another way if you listen to a piece of music that was done inspired on the piece, and then you see the piece. So the idea, when you were there in front of the stand in the map, you could listen the different pieces. And the kids that came to do they really liked the experience of making pieces based on the feelings that each of these design pieces have. And you can see, for example, here, you probably know this is the famous Alvar Aalto vase. It's another piece of Finnish design, and they are not only making music, but they are also experimenting and doing sound experiments with the Alvar Aalto vase there. So through the map you could get that. So my idea was that if I fill the map with interesting material, then visitors are going to have interesting. So it was like, how do you inspire people to get and to really care about the map and the comment they are going to do, is by really like making all these workshops and making all these seeding the map and not leaving that map empty. Because in the previous case, in the gallery, in the Young Biennale, then I left the map empty there. And I think if you take the time to really seed it, then the results are different. So, why these participative pieces, right? Why these are important? And for answering that, what I did is that I analyze the material I gather. So these are the different messages, the comments from people and from the staff that I got there. So yes, like one of the whys is because a lot of people want to approach and need to approach in a humorous way. So, and they can do it, and not necessarily the personnel of the museum are going to start to their own objects fun. So why don't we leave them the stage to do fun out of the pieces in the museum? So it says they are like excellent chairs. They are like the chair is like a pet. It smiles and gestures to me like a funny rascal in its own way each day. So it's another way to get into the piece. And then you have people that that connect to the exhibition before going and after going to the exhibition. And you have to allow for this extended period of connecting with the pieces. And this is what allows these online pieces. So the map was online, and some of the visitors went there, and they really put links, they really told what they knew. And a lot of the visitors to museums, they are experts in their own fields. So it's great to allow for this process of getting to know the exhibition and doing what they can do, but also later on connect and allow them to enrich what's there in the exhibition. So we have here the foreign view, because in the Design Museum in Helsinki there's a lot of foreigners. So this is something that the museum itself won't show, right? Because it's like the Design Museum showing finished design. But if you let visitors, then you get into these messages that shows how foreigners relate to finished design. So some of the comments also relate to the experience, like how people use that, and again, this is something that normally is out of you don't explain exactly how a certain object is used. And the person, and when you see the object, in my opinion, it says nothing, or well, it's like a nice little fish. But when someone explains you why the mouse is like that, then it makes sense. So it's like giving the visitors the possibility to make sense by telling the experience. Then this is one of the odes. This is an anti-ode, actually. So, like, the person did not like at all the lamp, but I thought that anyway, it's why not? If you don't like the lamp, why not to? And it's also like another way to relate emotionally to the exhibition and to give a space for that, to emotions. Then, of course, it's a dialogue, no? Someone in the museum said, like, hey, I heard that this story that these scissors were the color of the plastic part that was the leftovers. And then someone from the museum, an expert in the museum, answered to that question. So is that true? And then someone answers. So again, it makes the person that leaves the comment like the commitment to come back and to see if the museum staff has answered that. Then there is, for example, this comment shows the expertise of the visitors, because the personnel in the museum did not know that there is like this aeronaut, so that it's a fan club of Aero Arnio. So it was a visitor that brought that knowledge into the museum. So it's also a way to enrich the knowledge we have on the objects that the museum holds. No, well, creativity by allowing people to not only interact with the objects in an intellectual way, but also in a creative way. This is the collection, like play, create. you can be inspired, and this could be good for us. So, to the question of how to create interactive design that encourages people to participate in exhibitions, well, you know, doctoral dissertations, they have to be complex. So I did an ecology of participation in which I kind of map different communities, places, practice, and the interactive pieces. And I show how it's important to involve and to have different strategies that would involve different part of these maps. So I will use this map to show you other examples in other museums that I'm interested. So, for example, in the Indianapolis Museum of Art, when they have a website in which they are very transparent on their actions, and they show the visitors how many students they have received, how much they have take loan for buying artworks, and how much they spend on electricity. So the way to make the community participate, it's to give them a lot of information about the actions that they do. So I think that this is mainly like taking groups, couples, individuals, and the online, no? Because in my piece I have been using on-site strategy and online together. In this case, it's mainly in the web that they do that, and they also work with conservators because they show there, for example, the works of art that they are buying, that they are selling, the loans that they are getting. So, like, you can do, what I want to say is that you can do participatory and transparent actions in the collection from different perspectives and taking into account different colleagues inside the museum. Like, my experience was that it's easy, and it has been easier for me to work with educational staff because they are the ones that are more near the audience and always want to communicate with the audience. But I will show you some other strategies that were not coming from the educational staff, but were coming from others in the museum. So, for example, the Dulwich Gallery has done something that they were the pioneers in getting the friends of the museum to do a blog for the museum. So working together with the community of friends and then helping them. So they were people from different age. They trained them so they could write blogs for the museum. In the same line, for example, the Worker Museum in Finland has started now in the spring 2013 to allow people to just come to the museum and say, okay, you are interested in exhibition design, so you are going to work in this team. So allowed people to really work with the core of the collection in different teams to be part of the museum from the beginning. So in this time, the ecology of participation, it's like really departing from external collaborators and volunteers, and and looking to connect with remote visitors, right? For example, in the case of the blog, he's not looking to connect with the nearby visitors, but also to bring new ones. Then, for example, museums have been long going and publishing pictures in their own sites, but nowadays they are much more going to where people are. In this case, it's Flickr. Flickr is a service in which people share their own pictures. So what Bangor Museum has done, I think, is extremely interesting, is that they cannot publish and they cannot take pictures of the pictures of the work of art in the exhibition, but people does it anyway. And people take pictures of themselves in front of the museum, of the construction work of the museum. A lot of pictures that people take and then they go and tag it with Van Gogh Museum. So what they have done is to gather all these people, to make that community, and say, okay, why don't you come and publish your pictures in Museum Van Gogh group? So they have created a community inside Flickr, and they have invited all these people that in their own visit to the museum have taken pictures. So they have enriched their own collection of pictures and documentation of the museum by gathering all this from visitors. So this was like an initiative coming from marketing and communication experts in the museum, and again to gather and to connect with remote visitors, commenting and publishing these pictures. In the Natural History Museum, for example, they have a whale that is twittering. So again, like it's a way to connect with the young audience. So the whale is, they have a big whale in the hall of the museum, and they make the whale itself tweet and say what's going on now in the museum. And this is like to include and to give the possibility to interact to the young audience. So these are all that I told till now is my previous research, the research I have done till 2009, and I will tell you what we are doing now with my colleagues in Finland, in our group. So we see like the social inclusion and accessibility issues are very well known in the museum community, and there is a continuum from these ones to participatory pieces in which people are really not only having access but also taking part, creating on the basis of that. And now we are moving into these open approaches that with all this discussion about open data and that it allows the museum to open more the content and the data for creative and for reuse. So we are part, Open GLAM is an initiative run by Open Knowledge Foundation. It's in London. You probably know them, but the idea is to promote free and open access to digital cultural heritage held by galleries. GLAM stands for galleries, libraries, archives, and museums. So as we wanted to have our own group with our own discussions in Finnish for Finnish institutions, so we opened Avon GLAM in Finland, and now it's a working group that is part of Open Knowledge Foundation in Finland, and we have been holding workshops, seminars, and events to work together with cultural organizations. So we have been working on that approximately a year, and now the group has received a grant from the Ministry of Education to do it widely and to offer training and courses on openness. So the research questions that we have been dealing with is how to motivate museums towards openness, and what is the contribution that this discussion on openness can bring to museums specifically. So we have, during that year, we have organized, now it's more than 4, but it's like 6 workshops in different cities around Finland. And I will go quickly to the analysis of this workshop material, because this is what I'm doing now, so I'm more excited about this. So the workshops, they had a predefined group work. They collaboratively people map possibilities and challenges of sharing authorship, and how they engage with the public, and what are the risks, the contradiction, the ethical questions about releasing content with more open terms of use. So the approaches are like the social inclusion, the participatory, and then open practices. And something that we realize is that when we talk about accessibility and talk on social inclusion, mostly we are inspired by the people who we are going to invite. Are we inviting now mothers with babies to the museum? Are we inviting now people with different needs? So it's like this question of who is invited. And often, in the museum context, open is perceived like, oh no, we are going to enter into a technical discussion of copyright issues, and this is something that it's going to be very complex because it's about all this lawyer terminology, but not in terms of the possibility to the audience for engagement. So there is a lot of possibilities if we open and we release content. So this is why we think that we need more of these workshops in which we exchange our experience. So we are trying in this Open is to invite new actors, this time to the museums, and these are like the developers, the volunteers, and the designers. And museums are doing more and more, for example, these events called hackathon, in which they all come together and, for example, they create new apps new visualizations, new digital services based on the content of the exhibition. So in the participatory approaches, like mostly the question is how to take part. So people is inspired in the activities, like what are we going to allow them? Are we going to allow them to take pictures? Are we going to allow them to do videos and make a video competition of the content? But and there is, of course, a special invitation to external collaborations like associations and communities that have interest in the museum. And I think like museums have been doing these participatory trials more and more, and it's developing a sense of trust with certain communities. And on the basis of that, we can go one step forward and move into open practices. In open practices, there is no invitations, because if you release your content, then whoever can make an app based on the material that you are giving. And this time, you are going to work in memory sessions, doing wiki marathon, hackathon, wiki workshops, editathon. For example, museums, I don't know if I have it, no. The Chiasma, the Modern Art Museum, has had, for example, sessions, wiki sessions in which they invite people to write articles on Wikipedia on the museum. So these are, in my opinion, open approaches in which they open, for example, the library of the museum, and they invite people to write articles, and they also teach them, because to write an article in Wikipedia has its own rules, so they need a guideline for that. And these kind of events in which content is released and is also, for example, now the Finnish National Gallery is releasing all the metadata of their content on their open licenses. That means that there is a lot of data that could be used for future visualizations or for future services. So these are the type of topics we are interested in working now. People that can engage by creative services, products, or new interpretations. So if I do a new app, then that means app is this thing for the cellular phones. If I do a new app, that means that my own app can bring other people and can invite to others. So it's very different to the participative thing, in which I give the possibility to people to comment, full stop, and there it is. But if I give you the possibility to do a visualization or an app, then you might invite others. So collection will be seen, used, interpreted, and recreated in unexpected ways. This is an open approach that involves, of course, certain risks, but this is in the direction that we are hopefully going. So my conclusion is that In the case of the open practices, the audience is taking part in the production and design of visualizations and products and services based on the museum collection. And this time, the audience take part as experts because they are interpreting our collections and they are making new invitations. They can design, publish, and make invitations to others. So, of course, openness gives space to the surprising and ask ethical questions. If we release content, then what's going to happen with our content? And I think like the recommendation or the suggestion is that nurture trust with the museum community, doing this work with them, making the hackathons happen in our own spaces, and so in order to do things together and ensure that we are talking about what our objectives are the same, that with external collaboration. And this is all, and you can find our work there. Thank you. I hope you have many questions. Otherwise, I start asking.
Yes, do you have any questions?
Yes.
I think I would like to comment on this. Thank you very much for a very stimulating presentation. A lot of these things is also on my mind, of course, and probably a lot of other professionals' minds. How can you work with the public, and how do you make good participatory practices? And I find that you ended with this very interesting thing about the open practice, where you actually don't invite anybody, and I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, but I think one of the problems with that maybe sometimes can be, or at least comment again, it's essential then, in my experience, that you actually have a very good data to begin with, because the more you have not really, the more you're not really trying to delineate what it is that you want users to do, the more you actually need the original information to be very good, so that you have some of that involved in the whole further creation process. I'm not really sure there was a question in there somewhere, but I think it's important to talk about that, and also that putting the material out there and letting users use it doesn't mean that you can sort of just put it out there and then forget about it. You have to keep sort of engaging with these products that come out of the...
Definitely, and this is part of the things I talked in the previous. I think you have two issues there. One is about the quality of the data that you are releasing, and this is a question that everybody asks. Like there is no museums that have all the data extremely well done, and so one of the things why they don't want to release is because not everything is complete. And I think it's part of the thing that we have to accept, that metadata and the data and the materials, they are not complete, and it's part. Why not to release it incomplete? Why not to say, like, this is what we have, and we are missing this and this piece? And also, when you are doing one of these sessions in which you open certain, it's not only about releasing a certain amount of data, but it's also to motivating, facilitating, encouraging, and engaging with people that will be able and willing to do things with that. So it's not. It's again the same as with the map. Not just leave it empty, but when you release data, the idea is also to accompany this, to support that process and work together with the communities that are eager to do things. Because then we also can reassure that what they do is also following the mission of our own organizations. Yes.
Any more questions?
Hello, thank you. I wanted to ask about these copyright issues. How do you tackle that, or what do you see, what will be in the future in terms of that? if I...
Copyright issues, you know, it's very complex. So I think that each museum can have their own limitations. So it's something that needs to be tailored and needs to be discussed in each organization separately. But in what we have seen in Finland is that in many cases the revenue for selling the material of the museum is very little. So in fact museums, they could benefit out of releasing their content because then more people would engage with that. So for many museums, at least in Finland, what they get back out of selling pictures, let's say, is like really very little for the whole museum organization. But you have another, you ask about copyright, and I think these are the things that we tackle more in the workshop when we see like each organization separately and each case separately. It's very difficult to talk about copyrights as a whole, but you said something more.
It's one thing if museums and some organizations are dealing with their own issues, like what they have in their museum, and they have the rights for that. Yes. But if you ask people to come and participate, and it can be very, very wide, and maybe they want to add a content or something that kind of triggers their imagination, and then it comes out that, oh, there are some issues there. It's like a wider topic, if you know what I mean.
Yes, you mean like the copyrights of the material, for example, let's say the copyrights of the poems that people left in the exhibition, or the copyrights of the music that people left in the exhibition. I think in most of the cases, visitors themselves, they do not care about that. They are very happy releasing and giving the museum that without caring what is. Anyway, as the organization holding that, you have to be very careful how to treat it, and also say that, well, this is going to be presented in this and this context and used in that way, and make a statement in the exhibition about how you are going to use that material. I would recommend that, but it's tricky because people themselves, they write and they might make music and just give it for free without really considering. But I think it's part of the educational agenda that museums have to have in the near future, is to teach people to be more careful with their own data. And we know that lately there has been discussions about how we treat our data. So I think it's going to come more and more into the table. How do we do that? Especially with the results of visitors' participation.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, I have a more organizational question about your Finnish Open Glam group. Could you say how big is the initiative group, and are these initiators themselves outside of the memory institutions, let's say academics as you, or do you also have people who are inside the institutions in the core team?
We have both. Yes, we have people. We have the core team. How big it is? Let's say that now it's around 10, 15 persons. But of course, at the beginning we were less. And yes, there is researchers, and there are people in the libraries and in the museums and in the archives as part of the core group. And what we have done during this year and a half, let's say year, is like different ones have host once in a month a different event. So in that way, like we host different small events in which we talk about these issues, and also we have been organizing these workshops too in the whole countries. But it's a small group.